Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the move of what if Deku had to face his past? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. His leg jumped up and down in a steady rhythm as Izuku listened to Uraraka and Ida go on and on about random topics. He laughed at one of Kaminari's many jokes, which was directed at the explosive blondes this time, and smiled at the way that Kaken snarked back at him. It was comforting somewhat how relaxed and carefree they had all been this past month, and he was all for it. But he guessed that it was to be expected, since for the first time since they had gotten into UA, and probably for the first time in Izuku's life, nothing had gone wrong. No arguments, no urgent tests that they had to cram for, no school trips that always ended with villains attacking them, no kidnappings which ended with someone getting badly injured. Aside from that, life had been going smoothly. The work studies were still sailing pretty smoothly after the raid, and everything seemed somewhat peaceful, although Sir Nighteye still didn't forget to nag at him wherever and whenever he could. Mirio Senpai's quirk was back thanks to Aries' quirk training. His relationship with Kaken was getting better with every passing day, after the both mentally and physically draining fight they had had that night in ground beta. His understanding of One for All had been improving each passing day, and he was getting better at expressing himself after everything had happened. It had seemed like there was nothing and nothing at all that could ruin their days in any way. But of course, he was Izuku Midoriya, and nothing stayed peaceful long enough. The bliss of the moment ended when the classroom door opened, silencing everyone. As soon as Izuku looked up, and his eyes caught sight of short pink hair, and a bright-looking smile that stretched on the man's face, he felt himself freeze. He quickly casted his eyes down, and squeezed his wrist as Uraraka and Ida moved to their places, Ida apologizing to the newcomer and Nedzu, both of them unaware of the inner battle that Izuku was facing. That couldn't be him, could it? Not after all that he had done. Yui was a safe place, there was no way that he could get past the security and come here. Yes, it couldn't be him. It couldn't be him. A lot of people could have pink hair and a kind-looking smile, a lot of teachers could have his looks, a lot of... This is Arudo Takeji, your new supplementary homeroom teacher. Nedzu exclaimed cheerfully, but Izuku didn't dare raise his gaze from his table as his fears were confirmed. Not a lot of people could have the same name. He will be giving you lessons while Aizawa-san is not here. Why, just why was he here? Why when everything seemed to be getting better? Where was Aizawa-sensei? Had something bad happened? Why was he here instead of his sensei? Before the Shy Hasaikai, Aizawa-sensei had promised to make sure that he was always safe. So where the hell was he? Mina raised her hand, before voicing Izuku's questions. Where is Aizawa-sensei? He is out on a special mission at the moment, and won't be able to give you guys classes for the next couple of weeks. So Arudo-san will be taking his place till he comes back. The pink-haired man just grinned, taking a moment to look at every single one of them. I hope that we can get along in the short amount of time that we will get to be together. I have only ever taught as a teacher in a middle school till now, so I will appreciate all of your help. I am Ida Tenya, the class representative. As the students of UA's Class 1A, I promise that we will do our best to help you out during your time here, Arudo-sensei. Thank you, young man. I appreciate it a lot. A chair was pushed back, and Izuku looked to the side to see the seated Ida, who was staring at the man with an admiring gaze that was filled with trust. That gaze was all it took for Izuku to know that this man was the same person who had ruined his middle school years much more than his bullies had. The door to the classroom opened before being closed shut as Nedzu left, leaving the man with his students. Arudo brought his hands together, creating a big clap. Now, even though I have seen a lot of you during the sports festival, I don't know anything about you personally, and since it is my first day, why don't we use the next 3 hours to get to know each other? The man's voice sounded soft as he asked that, in a way that seemed to pull the students in. Shiro raised his hand to speak, and the man allowed it. But sensei, we have English lesson after dash. Oh, Mike sensei is with your homeroom teacher at the moment, so I will be taking over his lessons too. The man nodded towards Aoyama. Now why don't we start with you? Aoyama stood up eagerly. I am Aoyama Yuga. My quirk is Naval Laser. My hero name is Dash. Arudo raised his hand, silencing the sparkly teen. Not those stuff, I already know about them. I would like to know about you guys personally. What do you like to do in your free time? What is your favorite sport? What is the name of your favorite book? What is your music type? Who is your favorite hero and things like those? Izuku looked around at his classmates. Normally, he would have wondered how someone wouldn't find this weird, how a teacher asking these wasn't creepy, how a supplementary teacher, who wasn't going to be there for long, asking this wasn't creepy. But their admiring and trusting gazes told him everything that he needed to know. So he listened as his classmates told everything that the teacher needed to know about them, as the man's smile grew bigger and bigger till it resembled a creepy grin that Izuku had seen in his nightmares again and again. After all, it was too late to do anything. It was too late to fix the situation, as his classmates were already spellbound by the man. So there was nothing he could do for the next 3 lessons, except pray that his sensei came back soon. He laid on his bed in the dorms and sighed tiredly. His nerves had been on end for the whole day, scared that he would bump into Arudo-sensei, scared that he would make a mistake and look into his eyes. After the first 3 lessons had ended, he'd been grateful to be able to escape out of the classroom without the man stopping him. It had made one side of him hope that the man didn't remember him, that he didn't recognize him, or well, he didn't put the dots together and realize that the quirkless loser that he had tormented for 3 months was him. Because after all, he had changed beyond recognition. He was stronger now than he had been 2 years ago, he was much braver in the face of danger, and he was smarter. And last of all, the biggest difference was that he actually had a quirk now, a quirk that he was mstring and... But the man's quirk was strong enough to put even the school principal Nedzu, the supposedly smartest creature on Earth, under his control. So what could he, a measly teen, do? Well, a measly teen who had taken down a total of 3 villains out by himself. But it would mean game over as soon as their eyes met. How had things gotten this messed up? Just why, after all this time, when everything was becoming better and better? He couldn't go against the man. He knew that he knew his limits, and this man just passed his limits. He didn't even know how he could break someone out of the man's quirk. The only person who could actually go against the man was probably his Aizawa-sensei, so the only thing that he could do was probably to... He stopped and shot up, letting a grin decorate his face. He got up from his bed, and went to his desk, which was surrounded by All Might figurines, and opened a new notebook. He picked out a pencil and wrote down the man's name. Aizawa-sensei and Sir Nighteye had told him again and again in the last 2 months that his notes were pretty resourceful and would be really useful in taking down villains. So what was stopping him from taking down notes on a villain that he couldn't take down? He wouldn't know about it, and Izuku would both be helping his sensei, while also helping his future self who could bump into someone with a similar quirk. Aruto Takeji. Quirk. Name unknown. Quirk function. Makes the owner of the quirk force others to trust him through eye contact. It becomes stronger every time that eye contact is made and doesn't fade away with time. He stopped, thinking about his mother who had trusted Arudo. He had to do his best so that the two of them never met again. The quirk doesn't have any known side effects, and the time needed for the effect to fade away is also unknown. The quirk gives the owner a glass-like eye color, which makes people wonder about it and look at the man, again and again, to see what his eye color actually is. It gives him an advantage as he doesn't need to force people to look into his eyes. He would need to make updates on the man every single day, since he hadn't really looked for a weakness 2 years ago, not thinking that anyone would come to stop the man. Maybe he could ask Mirio-senpai or Sir for something that might stop those kinds of quirks. Because the man couldn't be the only one with a quirk like that. And he could also do research about the quirk online, since someone had to have a quirk similar, one that works through eye contact. He checked the time and sighed before closing his notebook and getting up from his place. He took the notebook and put it under his carpet before going to bed. His sensei also had a quirk that relied on his eyes, and it wore off after he blinked. Shinso had a mental quirk that wore off after the user let go, or the one under the effect of the quirk felt pain, but Shinso had also never really held someone under his control for longer than 10 minutes. Izuku sighed as he closed his eyes, He had to get enough sleep so that he didn't doze off during class the next day. He didn't want to create any openings for the man. Even though Izuku wouldn't admit it, he was smart, maybe a bit too smart for his own age, his own peers, either that or he was just someone meant to end up in the middle of trouble no matter what happened. When asked others, they would say that it was somewhat a mix of both of them, since even his sensei had given him the nickname Problem Child from the beginning of the year. But if someone asked Izuku, he would say that he had a gift for reading people who were trouble, who would either force him to go far for them, or those he would be willing to go far for. He read others like they were an open book, as everyone was a painting that was to be inspected. And in the end, he gave all of them full points because of how complex they were. He had probably been doing this since the beginning of middle school, following patterns, knowing when someone would become set off, what was enough to set someone off, what they were hiding. However, he had never used it against them, nor had he ever exploited them in any way, no matter how much they had pushed him to do so. When he looked across the classroom, gazing at every single one of his classmates, he saw right through Shudo's family issues, Kaken's inferiority complex, Momo's fear of never being enough, Kaminari's jumpy nature that flinched too much for his liking, Kirishima's need to be manly, Mina's smile which felt too fake sometimes, and so on. So as Izuku looked at the man that others adored so much, he knew that the man was a two-faced snake. But it shouldn't have been a surprise, as he had discovered that 2 years ago. The man's boots which hit the floor aggressively, his tall figure that liked standing too close and towering over them as if trying to show his status, and his creepy smiles that stretched across his face, sending shivers down his spine. Back when he had been in middle school, he hadn't had anyone on his side. He had been alone against the man and everyone else. He had counted himself lucky that he had gotten out of it with scars on his back, trust issues that had lasted for a very long time, and nightmares which visited him once every month. He counted himself lucky that he had had to endure the man's mind games for only 2 months and not more. But as the man stood in front of him, talking to them about a party that he had asked Nedzu to arrange so that everyone could join, he wished that the man had just disappeared into thin air to never be found again. Because someone with his quirk would most likely never go to jail. His classmates, his teachers loved him, even adored the man even though he had only been with them for the last 2 days. And Izuku hoped that they would escape the man's quirk soon, because it was agonizing to see them act in a way that they normally wouldn't act. The man was over his 40s, maybe in his early 50s, but the way that he acted, the way that he smiled and talked made him seem younger than their sensei. As soon as the class ended, once again Izuku successfully slipped away with his costume, wondering for the millionth time in the last 2 days if the man remembered him or not. He clenched his case harder and headed towards his senpai's classroom, beaming from the inside. The blonde was just like a sun on earth, with how much he was shining, and Izuku felt himself be rid of all of his worries just by being next to him. It made him wish to be like him, be that bright and outgoing like his senpai was, to be able to brighten the days of others just like he did. Deku! Mirio senpai! Izuku rushed towards the older student, and held back a laugh at the sight of Amajiki senpai trailing after the blonde along with Hato senpai. Oh, it's the little broccoli! The lilac-haired girl greeted him cheerfully. Are you guys going to work studies together? Are you guys working on any cases? How is Eri doing? I haven't seen your teacher in the last couple of days. Is he taking a break? It is weird that we haven't been hearing about 1A in the last couple of days. I guess there haven't been any villain accidents lately. When you were coming here you looked a bit down, or you will dash. Ha-do. The lilac-haired girl stopped, before looking at Mirio, who was smiling. The girl tilted her head, and Izuku watched as Mirio sighed fondly. Izuku wondered if he could have a friend like his senpai one day, who would stop his ramblings when they got too much, who would listen to them seriously when others were not around. If the two of you have a contest for who asks the most questions, we will be stuck here for years. Let's do the questions later, alright? The girl just huffed, while Yusuke felt blood rush to his face. You have been stopping them more lately. It's mean, Mirio. Sorry, but later please? Amajiki ended up saving them, much to Izuku's relief. Hato, let's go, you need to get to Ryukyu's agency. Soon, don't you? The girl just huffed, and nodded before turning around and leaving with the ravenet. Izuku just chuckled. He liked the older senpai, and loved the way that she asked questions at the speed of light, but the fact that it took time to answer and ask questions didn't change, and time wasn't really on their side at that moment. It had become somewhat a costume lately, to come together with his senpai at school, and take the long road to the agency. The both of them didn't really have that much in common, but Izuku adored their talks nonetheless. It would be somewhat comforting to hear the older ramble about everything that had been going on, him getting used to his quirk, Sir acting like a protective mother hen whenever they went out on a new mission. The older wouldn't stop him when he started to ramble on and on about his quirk or something else. He would just let him, while doing his best to sink in everything he was saying. And then he would try to add his ideas on everything that he had heard, and he would hear a lot of things, sometimes even all of it, as he was used to this thanks to Hado-senpai. But this time, Izuku just wished to get to the agency as fast as they could as he asked Mirio if they could take the shorter route. He needed to ask things to Sir, things that he didn't want to talk about in public, things that he couldn't risk the blonde hearing in any way. He would trust Mirio with his life on any given day, but when it came to Arudo Takagi, he couldn't risk anything. Years ago, he had talked to his mom, telling her about Arudo's quirk, asking her to help him, to at least change his school because he couldn't take it only to be brushed away. Arudo had acted earlier than him at that time, talking to his mother and informing her about everything that he had supposedly done in the class. Izuku had never been beaten by her mother before that, he had never really seen her mother drink before that, he had never known that her mother was capable of being that cruel. Deku. Izuku looked up, and made eye contact with the blonde before erasing his eyes. He didn't want his Mirio-senpai, who was just like the sun, to hate him, he couldn't take it if he did. So Izuku forced a smile to cover his features, a smile that he had given his mother time and time again, and exited the train. He needed to talk to Sir. There had to be something, anything that they could do against the man. Senpai, can I maybe ask for you to stay outside? I have to ask Sir something. Everything inside of him was against him not trusting the older boy, but Izuku knew that he couldn't risk it, he couldn't. Of course. I'll just be here till Sir calls me inside. He had been expecting the older student to be offended, to be hurt or angry at what he was asking, but the other male just smiled at him. His senpai didn't sound offended and even had a bit of relief in his voice, which Izuku wasn't sure what for. Izuku was truly blessed to have known the older. He slowly headed inside the room, to be met with Sir, who just signed tiredly at the sight of him. We weren't late today, Izuku murmured, and heard the man sigh once again. That you were not. The man added another pile to his stack of documents, before looking up. Izuku watched as the man became alerted right away as he realized that the blonde was not there with them. Where is Mirio? He's outside. Why is he? If this is about one for all, I believe that you know that you can always talk about it next to Mirio as he dash. Izuku intervened with a loud squeaky sound, even surprising himself. This is not, it is not about one for all. The man straightened up at that, before gesturing the chair with one of his hands, his eyes trailing the paper in front of him. Izuku knew that they still had a lot of way to go, that the man wouldn't become friendly with him just because they had fought side by side in the raid, but he hoped that it was soon, since the possibility of Arudo coming here and to take control of one of his mentors was close to inevitable. Sir. The man looked up at him, and Izuku tried his best not to break eye contact, which proved to be difficult after avoiding his sensei's eyes for the last 4 days. I was wondering if there was any way to stay away from someone who has a quirk which works through eye contact. I guess this is about Aizawa-san dash. No. Izuku bolted up from his place with a yell, making the pro-hero jump at the unexpected action. She sat back down again and sighed. There is this supplementary teacher at school, he dash. Izuku took a deep breath. He is able to make others trust him by merely an eye contact. Everyone in the class adores him, along with all of the teachers, including All Might. Deku. Izuku looked up at the man, afraid that he would see some kind of reaction of disbelief in the man's eyes, but the man had a foreign look in his eyes instead. Is this why you asked Mirio to stay outside? I trust Mirio-san with all of my heart, but if Ta-sensei already talked to him then Mirio, you can come in now. So Midoriya, do you trust me? The man's question stopped him, making him straighten up. He did, didn't he? He had trusted the man when he had led him during the raid, but he hadn't when the man had told him that he would lose to Overhaul, that he would die. He had been able to save Sir and Eri because he hadn't trusted him. The man asked him as if the answer was obvious, as if he could utter those words so easily after everything. Izuku mentally slapped himself. I trust you, he muttered. It took too much out of him to mutter those words to the man, but it also felt relaxing to know that he was still capable of saying those things. He trusted this man with this case. He trusted that even if he was put under Arudo's control, the man wouldn't waver thanks to his visions. The little smirk that the man put on made him want to take back everything, because of how smug it seemed. Sir, the both of them turned towards the blonde, and Nighteye pointed towards the couch in front of him, making the boy go ahead and sit down. Even though he was still wary about involving his senpai in this, his being there helped him relax. Mirio, I heard that there has been a supplementary teacher in UA lately. Did he ever come to your classroom? You mean Arudo-sensei? Izuku straightened a bit at the mention of the man, before nodding wearily. It was probably pathetic how he was acting at that moment, but he couldn't find it in himself to care. The ghost of the man haunted him, squeezing his throat and feeding lies to him, making him trust him as he slowly killed Izuku. The idea of the man sitting next to Eri, combing his fingers through her hair and feeding her lies was something that he never wanted to see. Something that he wouldn't dare see. He turned towards the pro-hero, who just raised his brows. The man sighed. Mirio, what did you think of the man? Honestly, he was a bit creepy now that you say it. He didn't come to class, but he was searching for Amajiki, Hado, and me. The other two were doing their work studies, so he only talked to me. I kinda thought that he was a touchy-feely person, but that amount of touching and hand-holding is a bit passing the boundaries? Exactly. Izuku took in a deep breath, feeling relaxed with the fact that Mirio knew that it was creepy, that he knew that what the man was doing was not normal. Deku, Izuku looked up as soon as he heard Sir mutter his name. You don't have to worry about Mirio falling for a quirk like that, and I am willing to say that your principal would have searched about the man before letting him teach at UE. We, heroes, have special lenses against these kinds of quirks. But what if his quirk is not registered dash? That would be impossible, as a person's quirk gets registered at the age of 4, so it might be that he has another quirk, and you were mistaken about his quirk. But dash. Will it make you feel better if I asked around about his quirk, and called you when I knew what it was? Izuku stopped. It probably would be the best course of action, since if the man's quirk was not what he thought it was, there was no way that he would be able to figure it out by himself. Yes, sir? Alright now dash. Sir. Izuku stopped the man, making him scowl a bit and look towards him. Yes? Would it be alright if I asked you to give me a couple of lenses? Just to be sure? Izuku gulped and played with his fingers as the man's gaze bore into him, making him anxious with every passing moment. Of course, it is only logical since you intern with me. But I will need to see how many I have left, and make sure that more are created at the same time. If you are right about that man, I don't want to risk him getting into the heads of others. Thank you, sir. Alright, now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the newest lead that we got for Trigger Dash. Izuku watched as Sir put down the phone with a sigh. Before turning towards him, he sat up straighter, holding back a flinch. We only have one left at the moment, but more will be coming in, for weeks' time, almost a month later. Izuku felt a cold shiver pass through him, as he looked down on the ground. There was only one pair. He couldn't give them to anyone, he couldn't protect others, he couldn't. I will be giving them to you, but you should be sure to take it out during night times before you go to sleep, and it loses its effectiveness if you only put it on one of your eyes. Is there an age limit to it? Thankfully no, quirks like that don't work on kids younger than 4 years old, and every kid older than 4 can wear these lenses. Even though it might irritate those who are older than 50 or those who usually wear glasses. But Sir Nighteye, my glasses are specially made to stand those kinds of quirks, so you don't have to waste time worrying about me. Izuku slowly nodded, before getting up as the man dismissed him, giving him the lenses. He was met with Mirio outside. He felt somehow both grateful and guilt that the other male was there, wondering just how long he had been waiting there for him, but just smiled. He tried to push the guilt to the back of his head, not wanting to deal with it now. Senpai, you didn't need to wait for me, he said, an uncertain smile decorating his face, but the older male just laughed. What kind of a senpai would I be, if I left my kohai to get back to the dorms by himself? But still? The older male threw his arm over his shoulder, silencing him. Izuku fought back a flinch, now somewhat used to how touchy his senpai was, and let the older drag him away to the train station. He esiki in the much-needed comfort from the older male while clenching to the packaged lenses with his other hand. Suddenly it felt as if everything was already getting better, that Izuku had worried for nothing. He should have known better. Because he was Midoriya Izuku, and nothing went well for him. Senpai, Izuku murmured softly as the male turned around to leave. It was late, and yet his senpai was here, dropping him off. The blonde boy that had become like an older brother to him turned around, and Izuku bit his lips. Can you dash?" he sighed, the older giving him an encouraging nod. "Senpai, I know that it is not my place to say this since I am nowhere near as great as you are and I don't know everything and I might even be wrong about Arudo-sensei like Sir said and I'm rambling, once again Kami-sama." He combed his right hand through his hair, letting out a deep sigh. Kami, he was such a pathetic mess. "Deku," the blonde said, softly, encouraging and understanding. Izuku huffed. "Please," Izuku started, pleading as he looked down at his shoes. "Just be careful. Act as if he did make you trust him so that he doesn't. I know that it might be nothing and it might be all in my head like Sir had implied, but please just to be sure." The silence that followed was suffocating, before it was followed by shuffling. He finally looked up as the blonde's hand settled on his shoulder. Tagata-senpai was smiling encouragingly, just like always, somehow knowing what he needed, always listening patiently, never judging him for anything. If something is giving you that much anxiety, that much stress, it can never be only in your head. I'll be sure to look out. The smile shifted into a soft one, causing a chain reaction and making Izuku smile along with him. "And tell you what. I'll also tell you if I see anything weird about him, alright?" Izuku murmured a small thank you, and the blonde gave him a final nod. "That is the least I could do for such a nice kohai," he clapped, his hand leaving Izuku's shoulder. "Okay, then if that's settled, good night and see you next time, okay?" "Yes, senpai." With that, Izuku went inside feeling hopeful at the fact that someone trusted him. Tagata waited for his kohai to go inside his dorm, watching after him with a small smile on his face. As soon as Izuku disappeared from his view, Mirio turned around, the smile disappearing from his face. It was probably a relief that no one was around except the few security robots, since the expression that he wore was not fit for anyone to see. It was too dark, too cruel, too ruthless, too much like a villain. But that was to be expected, as Mirio replayed the memory of the substitute teacher hugging one of his classmates, too touchy for comfort, too close. He remembered the way that the pink-haired man had literally forced Mirio to look him in the eye, his eyes fully black, with a brownish, tunnish center and blood-red lines covering the sides. It had made him nauseous just by looking at it, making him almost GG. But he hadn't, instead he had stayed still, not wanting to offend the man. Mirio was used to things that many people would push aside, many people would scoff at. He was used to Heido's rambling habit, that could go on for hours. He was used to Amajiki freezing up whenever he was nervous, used to the way that he would start shaking like a leaf even when no one realized it. And now, he was used to listening to every single one of Izuku's rambles, that he could follow thanks to Heido. He was used to how Izuku would start to shake when he wasn't sure that he was right, when he hunched his shoulders, started to look anywhere but his eyes, jumping whenever someone touched him without permission. He was used to giving him comforting hugs, letting him be the first one to let go, letting him make the choices for them. The Greenette was traumatized, probably had been bullied and pushed around most of his life, not taken seriously or been called a liar too many times, and now, he could guess who was behind his kohai's habit of averting his eyes all the time. Mirio believed in his kohai, just like he always had. Izuku opened his notebook, adding another page to his notes as he crossed a couple of the sentences that he had written on the first page. The man's eye color, as told by witnesses, is actually a misty gray on the background and a mix of different colors in the middle. Most say that it reminds them either of clouds or cotton candy, giving them comfort whenever they look him in the eye. His weakness is still unknown. The target is too touchy-feely. He joins heroics lessons even though he knows nothing about fighting. He is smart, not to be taken lightly. A way to counter Arudo's quirk. Lenses, made by Sir Nighteye's agency, seem to cancel the effect of quirks which are activated through eye contact. He closed his notebook and turned over, now looking at his ceiling. Izuku knew that it shouldn't have been that shocking to him, the way that his class had seemingly begun to worship the ground that Arudo-sensei walked on, the way that the man had them wrapped around his pinky finger. He had seen it happen to his classmates a couple years ago, but they hadn't been training to be heroes, they hadn't been at Yui. He had waited for something more, but he guessed that he should have expected it. His classmates, who were somewhat both stronger yet broken than his old class, valued eye contact, valued seeing their opponents, watching their body and eye movement every single moment, trying to guess the oncoming attack just as their enemy was starting to plan it. So they were too vulnerable, too weak when it came to mental attacks. Izuku had seen them try and fail to escape Shinsu's mind control way too many times, had seen them get tricked by his teachers even though it had been for their own good. He had seen them hesitate one too many times against an enemy's words, both in action and in his dreams that visited him every now and then, waking him up out of breath and crying because of the knowledge that they had been too lucky, that if luck hadn't been on their side, his classmates would have already been dead. Maybe, if he looked at it on the good side, it was a good thing. Arudo-sensei might have been one of the villains during the USJ attack, the training camp and so on, but he wasn't. They were at school, the man had a duty, and even though he hated the quirkless, believed that they were lower than animals, and yet he believed in found family. He wouldn't try to hurt any of them as long as they didn't threaten his small family mindset. And if he did, Izuku would save them by pulling the spotlight onto him. Because after all, that was what he was best at, pulling trouble onto himself. Deku? He jumped, chopsticks digging into his hand as he looked around him, his eyes meeting those of Ochako before he fastly casted them away. Her small hands, which had become stronger after she had started boxing to build up shoulder muscle, settled on his scarred ones. He fought the urge to pull it back, not wanting to alarm the bubbly girl. "You all right?" But was he? Ever since his meeting with Sir, everything had went bad on his side. He hadn't gotten enough sleep, he was too jumpy, and even though he tried his best to hide it, he knew that it was obvious. He settled on taking a deep breath before nodding and starting to force himself to eat. "Nothing, I was just thinking." He shrugged, as if he hadn't been angry at life, as if he hadn't been cursing the fates along with Arudo, who could just go ahead and, "If you say so." After months of being friends, Izuku knew that Ochako was aware of the fact that he wasn't just thinking, but he still found himself grateful for how she didn't push him. Kami, he hoped that tomorrow came faster, he hoped that Aizawa-sensei came as soon as possible, because he wasn't sure for how long he could stay under the man's eyes and stay sane at the same time. "Oh, I forgot." Izuku put his hands in his pocket and took out an eraser. "I forgot to give you back your eraser." "Oh, it's nothing." Midoriya, it is unbecoming of a Yui student to forget his eraser. Both of them looked at the approaching duo, and Izuku brought his hand to his neck, letting out a laugh while trying to ignore the chills that went through his body from just seeing the pink-haired sensei. "Haha, sorry Ida, I didn't think that my eraser would get lost." "Well, I think that it is a miracle that it wasn't lost till now. I have never seen someone use an eraser to the end like you do," Todoroki commented, and Izuku smiled at the other boy. "Well, anyway, how did your internships go?" Todoroki only sat down and stabbed his cold soba with his chopsticks. "I'm never going back." Izuku just smiled once again, as Ida started to go on and on about how proud he was to get a chance to see Endeavor in action as Todoroki's slurping just intensified. The lesson had went without any problems. Izuku hadn't done anything to pull attention onto himself in the last 4 days. He had tried to act as himself as much as he could, while also trying to change the little habits that he had kept from junior high. He had acted like a completely different person than his past self. Everything had been going all right. "Midoriya-san." He hadn't raised his hand at all. When he was called, he had deepened his voice a bit and had talked confidently. He had kept his eyes on the board and had never dozed off. He had been a mediocre student, not awful and at the same time not perfect to a degree which would never pull the attention of others onto himself. He had blended in. He had been fine, staying under the radar, listening to Arudo-sensei. Stay for a while? But it hadn't been enough, it was never enough. He might have been plain, he had done his best not to get full points during classes, he had ducked his head whenever any of the teachers had been close. I have to talk to you about something. The weight of the lenses in his pocket weighed heavily in his pocket as he nodded, knowing that it was game over. Everything had been going all right. Midoriya-san. He hadn't raised his hand at all. When he was called, he had deepened his voice a bit and had talked confidently. He had kept his eyes on the board and had never dozed off. He had been a mediocre student, not awful and at the same time not perfect to a degree which would never pull the attention of others onto himself. He had blended in. He had been fine, staying under the radar, listening to Arudo-sensei. Stay for a while? But it hadn't been enough, it was never enough. He might have been plain, he had done his best not to get full points during classes, he had ducked his head whenever any of the teachers had been close. I have to talk to you about something. The weight of the lenses in his pocket weighed heavily in his pocket as he nodded, knowing that it was game over. Izuku waited silently by his desk, as his friends passed by his side. After a while, the pink, cotton-haired man called for him, making him get up on auto. Sit down, we will be talking for quite long. And Izuku did so, hating every moment of it. It was pretty big of a surprise to find you here, Izuku. To say the least, I was pretty delighted. Izuku bent his neck down, curling up on himself. He heard the man in front of him sigh. But I am pretty anxious about the fact that you are in the same class as Katsukichi. Izuku's head bolted up, his eyes becoming as big as saucers. I remember how much he used to bully you back then, and I know for a fact that the school reglement says that a bully and the victim cannot be in the same classroom. He is not a bully, Arudo placed his hand on his shoulder, making him flinch. Not now, but I know for a fact that he used to be even worse than a bully, more so of an abusive person. But Arudo-sensei squeezed his shoulder, stopping him once again. But I believe that we can come to an agreement, after all, you have always been somewhat like my favorite in the class till now. Bullshit. Izuku thought, but didn't say anything at all. He knew how much the man had been obsessed with him till now. Arudo smiled, and Izuku looked into the man's eyes for the first time ever since they had met once again, and turned away. It churned his insides, how the man seemed so innocent yet devilish at the same time. His cotton-pink hair, spotless face, and dreamy eyes, accompanied with a smile worse than a devil's. Izuku would never fall for his charms, no matter what it took. I would appreciate that, sensei, he said, and the man sighed once again, this time relieved. All right. He took out a paper and passed it towards Izuku. This document took a pretty long time for me to reach. Albera Junior High School, records of Class B of XXXXXXXX. You can rip it right now and destroy it in front of my eyes, with that the case would be closed, and you would be destroying every proof of all those things that your teachers and classmates have done to you till now. Izuku clenched his hands till they were fully white. He knew all about the man's sinister ideas, knew all about how he pulled others into traps. If you don't, I will accept it as you wanting Bakugo to be expelled from Yui. Izuku wearily picked up the papers, knowing too well that he was also destroying all the evidence of how the man had manipulated him years ago, how he had used him, how he had made him his own puppet. He would never get to have any closure for what the man had done to him, maybe for others well, but never for himself. Izuku, I will give you 3 seconds, . Izuku held the papers in his 2 hands, and with a bit of help from One for All, he tore it apart. The way that the man's sinister smile became even wider would hunt him forever. The next couple of hours went by peacefully, but inside his mind was anything but peaceful. Izuku knew that Arudo was planning on doing something, after confirming his fears, and letting Izuku know that he knew who Izuku and Katsuki were. He was anything but alright. Izuku was almost sure that Katsuki was somewhat out of the equation now, since he had destroyed all the evidence of what he had done to him. And Izuku also knew that Katsuki was smart. He knew what to do in dangerous situations after all those times that he had been pushed into attacks. There was no way that he wasn't aware of the fact that Arudo was their old teacher, but Izuku had no idea how the blonde remembered the man. For him, he had been creepy, had been obsessive, had been controlling and had been abusive. But for the others, he had been a fun teacher that always helped them have fun and enjoy their time. No tests, no exams, just so that he didn't make them anxious and stressed, and they had been kids, so they had dived deep into the man's empty and dumb promises as he had acted as if he cared about all of them. So the way that the two of them saw the teacher could be mountains apart. He would like to ask the blonde about Arudo, but lately they didn't have any time to talk at all. Katsuki was a star student. He always kept his points high, went to bed early, gave his all to whatever he did, and listened to his parents' every word. So that meant that there was no way for them to actually converse because of all the tests that the teachers had been giving them, along with the extra lessons that they got from Vlad King after school. They got to the dorms at 6 p.m. or even later on bad days. Which meant that Katsuki spent those 2 hours studying or only socializing with his self-named Baku squad. That left no room for Izuku to intervene. The next day, Arudo asked him to stay after the lesson once again, this time telling him that his points were falling down and that he needed to do better in class. Izuku just nodded, a part of him knowing that the man was right, that he was going to fail if he went like this, that he would probably be kicked out of the hero course if he kept on being so dumb, so idiotic, so witless. He stopped himself. He usually shared first place with Katsuki on their tests. And now, he had merely fallen to fourth place, just to not gain unwanted attention. He was in front of 16 of his classmates in every single lesson, and 17 of his classmates during heroics and math lessons, considering that Shinso joined their lessons every now and then, and the fact that Izuku kept on beating him. There was no way that he would be thrown out of the course if he had only fallen 3 ranks. He took in a deep breath, and did his best to calm his nerves. He was tired, everyone was tired, but he wouldn't fall for Arudo's lies and tricks that easily, and would do his best to protect those around him, no matter what. Izuku was tired. Well, maybe that would be an understatement. The tests had been piling up, and it had been only one day ever since Arudo-sensei had talked with him about Katsuki, and 2 hours ever since he had messed with his mind, telling him that he would be expelled pretty soon. Nothing had happened yet, but Izuku knew that this was just the silence before the storm. He had no idea where the storm was going to come from, no idea who Arudo was going to attack with. And not knowing drove him literally mad. What the FCK is wrong with you? He was too tired to deal with Kaken, or anyone in general. Midoriya-sen, you should be more careful of your surroundings. Too tired of talking to others, coming up with reasons for just why he was failing at keeping his everyday fake smile on, why he wasn't getting better at heroes lessons, why he wasn't getting along with the man that everyone just seemed to adore for some reason. Deku-kun? Uraraka asked softly, and Izuku took in a deep breath. You ignoring me, nerd? Can't you just shut the hell up for even a second? He screamed, silencing everyone around him, including his classmates. Kaken was the first person to recover, as he walked up to his face with a snarl sewn to his face. What? You think that you are too good for us? You'd PhD, you think that you are better than me? Izuku was normally patient, but he was tired. Too tired to deal with everything that had been going on lately. I don't think that, Katsuki, but I do know that you would see that I have been having a hard day if you could take your head out of your ass for a single moment and looked around you. You are not the main character of anything. Everyone has a bad day every now and then, and you are not the only one who is able to feel stuff. He said, his voice growing louder with every syllable. Katsuki backed away, a frown adorning his features. The bell went off, and Izuku took that as his cue to escape his heroics class. As he rushed through the corridors, he only had one question in his mind. Just what had he done? Inko Midoriya was normally a sweet woman, and a really good mother. She loved, adored Izuku beyond anything else. For her, when her husband had told him or me, she had chosen her baby without hesitation. Because her baby was so small, and she had loved him so much more than anything else she could ever imagine loving in her entire life. She had taken care of him, tried her best to raise him as a good person, and a good son her whole life. Inko had no way of knowing how many sleepless nights she had stayed by her baby as he had cried to her, how many times that she had filled his father's shoes and acted as both a mother and a father, how many times that she had nursed him to health when he had become terribly sick, how many times that she had taken day off from her work, how many times she had moved away to give Izuku a better future. But as she listened to Izuku's pink-haired teacher, who had helped her so much when she was grieving, who had lent her one of his shoulders for her to lean on, she knew that she must have done something wrong. I know that Izuku is usually a perfect student, but he has been getting really bad lately. His mind is somewhere else during all of my lessons, he never really listens to me and has started to get into fights with his classmates. I have only done one test till now, and Izuku copied one of his friend's answers, merely saying that he was asking for the poor girl's eraser. He also destroyed one of the old documents that I had. I was going to hide it from his teachers, since it had everything that Izuku had done during his junior high years recorded inside of it, but he took it from me and ripped it apart. He then yelled at me, asking what the BP thought that I was doing with those files. The man sighed. Inko had done her best, but Izuku always seemed to cause problems for her, just like how he had told her years ago, as he had looked her in the eyes before giving her a tight hug. I know how much of a hard time you are having with raising your son, dear, so I will keep all of this between us, but I am scared that he might act out in front of another teacher of his. I am truly sorry, Inko. Inko sighed. Of course she wasn't cut out to be a mother, she was failing miserably. What had she even thought when she had said Hisashi that she would keep her baby? He would have been better off with another person, someone that wasn't as unstable as she was. She was such a bad person, bad mom, that's why Izuku was this problematic. It's alright, Arudo-san, thank you for letting me know. I will have a talk with Izuku and make sure that he does better during class. Thank you, love. I know that you will get to him if he really loves you. With that, the line went dead. Did Izuku love her? She had been a good mother, but what if she was wrong? Her best had never been enough in the past, so who was she to know that her best was enough this time? She had always been a failure. She had failed to keep her husband, had failed to study and raise a kid at the same time, had failed when she had forcefully bound Izuku to herself, had failed as she had raised her all those years. Inko got up and walked toward her wardrobe, where she had hidden most of her liquor, promising not to drink for Izuku. She opened it and took a sip, before hugging all of them to her chest and leaving to the living room. Just a bit wouldn't be that bad. Mom, he yelled into the silent house as he took out his shoes. I'm home. He heard a soft thud and yet no answers. Frowning, he lowered his backpack onto the floor and carefully walked towards the living room where the sound had come from. There, on one of the armchairs sat his mother, staring far, far ahead. Mom? He tried once again, and held back a flinch when the man turned towards him, her eyes filled with so much hatred and anger, much more than he had ever seen her harbor. Izuku watched as his mother sighed, placing the half-filled glass on the table next to her, as he started fidgeting in front of her. Izuku, she began to say, and it was enough to make him flinch once again with how cold it was. He wasn't sure just when he had averted his eyes, but he didn't even dare to raise his gaze up and look at the shell of a mother that stood in front of him. I had thought that your trouble streaks would have ended as soon as you got to Yui, she commented as she packed the bottle that stood next to her and took a big gulp from it. It wasn't my fault, he murmured, and the woman answered with a laugh. It had been a long time since he had seen the woman this furious, this angry and this drunk in front of him, and once again it was thanks to the call of Arudo-sensei. It wasn't your fault. You mean that you didn't rip apart Arudo-san's paper which held important things in it? That you didn't cheat in his class? That you didn't start a fight with Katsuki during class time? Izuku essayed in a breath. He had done them, he had taken the papers and had ripped it apart, he had stayed after school because the man had asked him to, he had given his eraser to Uraraka-san and wasn't sure how someone could have counted it as cheating, and had chided with Kaken, but that was it. It wasn't as the man had told her, it wasn't in a bad way, it wasn't. It's not how it seems, he tried, his eyes being filled with tears. The woman just raised her finger and pointed towards his room. Go and stay in your room for the next 2 days. Give me your phone and your analysis notebooks along with your computer. You are grounded. I don't want to see you right now. Go. Izuku bit his lips and started to go up the stairs, trying his best to hold back his tears. I shouldn't have ever kept you, he heard the woman tiredly murmur and ran to his bedroom, wanting everything to just stop even if it did only for a moment. Inko didn't come to his room, and neither did he leave, considering how she had locked him inside. She had done this a couple of times in the past whenever she had gotten drunk, afraid that she might have ended up hurting her in one of her episodes. He had thought that everything had gotten better in the last couple of months, but he guessed not. Izuku wasn't going to blame his mother for that night, if he was being honest. He wasn't sure if he could ever blame her no matter what she did to him. She had carried him for 9 months, and had never left her side after he had been born. His father had left, and she had stayed. His friends had left, and yet she had stayed. She had worked harder, spent her days at the hospital, working, ignoring the whispers that had been directed at her, all for him. He knew that his mother was aware of how she lost control when it came to alcohol, how she couldn't hold her liquor, and how she couldn't stop drinking whenever she had started. She had stayed away from it as much as she could. She had tried her best to keep her addictions behind locked doors. But he knew how hard it was to keep an addiction behind locked doors, as long as it kept on shining brighter and brighter through the keyhole. And when that addiction was the only way out that the person had, he knew how irresistible it could be. So he listened to his mother, listened to her cries, trying to ignore her comments from earlier, and got out of the room as soon as she fell asleep. He picked up the snoring woman carefully and gently, and carried her to her room. Izuku tucked her in like how she would do for him, and placed a small kiss on her forehead, before going back to his room, and locking himself in with his spare key, and diving under the covers. He loved his mom. He just hoped that the woman knew how much he cared for her at the end of the day. When he got back to school, he had to admit, Izuku felt like literal hell. It felt as if the man was everywhere, as if he needed to constantly keep up a fake facade to trick him into thinking that nothing had gone wrong, as if someone was watching his every single move no matter where he was. But he guessed that that was true in some kind of way. There was no way that Arudo-sensei could have gotten into Yui without using his quirk on Principal Nedzu, the one that watched over them like a hawk every single day. Izuku knew how Nedzu had both visible and secret cameras throughout the whole school, knew to what lengths the mammal could go just to protect them, and knew to just what length Arudo could go to take control of the whole school. Young Midoriya, he flinched and turned towards his mentor with a sheepish smile. "Why don't we finish our training session here today and take a break?" Yagi-san asked patiently, and Izuku sighed, before nodding. Izuku silently followed after that man, as he led him to their usual meeting place. As soon as the door closed behind him, he was able to breathe better. Nedzu had taken out all of the cameras that stood there, afraid that someone would somehow get a hold of the footage one day, not wanting to risk the secrets about Ofa being discovered by another person. Izuku watched as the man slowly walked towards the water boiler, and started to hum quietly, as he started preparing tea for the both of them. He walked to the couch, and let his body fall onto it with a deep sigh before he leaned his head on the couch. "Bad day?" Yagi-san asked as he passed down the little cup towards him, and Izuku sat up with a sigh. "Bad week? May I ask what might be the problem?" Izuku looked up at the man in front of him, and wondered for a bit if he could tell the man, if the man could help him in any way, or if he would just be seen as a potential pawn to Arudo-sensei. He sighed, before leaning his head against the back of the couch. "Sensei, have you met Arudo-sensei already?" The blonde asked as he took a small gulp from his teacup. So the man hadn't met him just yet? "Our subclass teacher, only till Aizawa-sensei comes back." The man nodded. "And what seems to be the problem?" Izuku set the teacup in his hands on the small coffee table in front of them, fearing that if he held the cup for longer he would have either broken the cup, or would have spilled it. He has a quirk which makes others trust him when someone looks into his eyes. The Greenette watched as the X-1 hero frowned. "I had thought that you wouldn't have discriminate others by their quirks without knowing them. That is the problem," he groaned out, interrupting his mentor. "I do know him. He had worked as a sub for a month at my old school." That caused the blonde to straighten up as his frown became even darker. "He remembers that I was quirkless, and he remembers how much he had hated me in the past. He already started to mess with my mother and Izuku stopped, as Yagi-san set his hand on top of his shoulder. He looked up, and felt his eyes tear up as the pro-hero gave his shoulder a small squeeze and smiled understandingly towards him. "I'll take care of it, all right?" Izuku wasn't sure what had made him nod, just why he had agreed to Yagi-san, but he had. And even though the man sent him a reassuring smile, even though he was supposed to be happy because Yagi-san trusted him, he was going to help him, he was going to be there for him, and he was supposed to be happy. He just couldn't make himself smile. So Izuku just gave one of his best fake smiles to the man, and forced his nerves to calm down. Things were starting to look up step by step, even if it didn't feel that way. Mirio was disgusted and was sure that he was going to get sick if he saw the man's eyes once again. The man had been there only for a week now, and yet Mirio had realized that his eyes changed according to his mood and that his kohai had been right. Those around him couldn't stop talking about the man's dreaming eyes, which reminded them of cotton candies, sprinkles, and oddly of something that had come out of a fairy tale. But he knew, thanks to his friends, that he hadn't imagined the man's eyes when they had talked for the first time. Whenever the man was confident with himself, his eyes would become like a dark void that ate Mirio's light. When Arudo was mad, they would become like sewage, brown and filthy in a way that made him feel as if everything was just wrong. He hadn't seen the man happy yet, but according to Nijire, his eyes became blood red whenever that happened, and that it made Nijire want to give herself to the man, to become a pawn on his board to whatever his plans were, not even stopping to wonder what would happen to her. Mirio knew that they needed to get rid of the man, and that they needed to get rid of him soon. For his kohai, for Midoriya's classmates, for his classmates and everyone that had fallen for the man's quirk. It had to end soon. Togata-senpai, he jumped a bit, and felt a smile crawl up to his face as soon as his eyes met emerald green ones. Midoriya, he said as he carefully slang his arm over the boy's neck, watching for any visible warnings of discomfort from the boy. When the boy only seemed to relax under his arms, he pulled the boy towards him with a grin. "Ready to go to sir?" he urged, and watched as the boy let out a small whine, and laughed once again. He would talk to the boy in the future, after they were out of the campus and were in Sir's office. And for now, he would just listen to the boy's rambles about everything and anything, just to see the boy laugh and smile more often. Midoriya was his kohai, and he would protect him from any kind of danger, both mental and physical. Thinking about the latest case, I think that we might be working with someone that has a camouflage quirk, or someone who is a chameleon mutant. When we look at the camera, it seems as if they straight out go invisible, but if that was the thing, wouldn't they have used their quirk throughout the whole robbery? Maybe they want to make a point and want others to know who they are? Mirio guessed and saw the boy's frown become deeper. Wouldn't that have been easier to do with a signature thing though? I mean, they could have left a symbolic thing behind, which would have made others really focus on them dash. Then why would they want to make others think that they are invisible? The boy's eyes lit up, and Mirio grinned, knowing just what was coming up. There are two options, the boy began to say as he held up two fingers. The first is that he is trying to frame a certain person, and the second thing that might happen is that they are trying to get the attention off of them. I think that the first one is much more possible, as there probably aren't that many people in Japan who can do something like that. Someone that can turn invisible whenever they want, that is a very specific quirk and could be found really easily on the database. However, our thief's quirk doesn't allow them to go invisible at all, they have to be touching a certain surface to go invisible. So as I had said, they have a quirk which is similar to a chameleon. So we need to find someone with a camouflage quirk, he added in, and Izuku shook his head. That and those who have a chameleon quirk. Mirio smirked when the boy turned towards him, his eyes shining as he did so. The blonde ruffled the shorter boy's head, as another arm snaked around his shoulder. "Detective Midoriya, you have solved the case," he said in a funny voice and watched as the boy let out a loud laugh, not caring who might be watching them nor who might be listening to them. Midoriya just laughed, his eyes forming little crescent moons, and his nose scrunching up. Mirio would do anything to erase those eye bags under the boy's eyes, to make him forget all of his worries, to help the boy surpass every single trauma that seemed to hold him down. "We have solved the case this morning. It turned out that the thief had a chameleon mutation that let him camouflage. He was incapable of turning invisible," Mirai said, and Lemillion fist bumped Deku, making him raise his eyebrows. The blonde just shrugged, before throwing his arm over the greenette's shoulders, giving him a side hug. The greenette took that as an invitation and just leaned into the blonde's side as they sat down on the couch in front of his table. Something was wrong. He opened his mouth, but went quiet once again when Lemillion shook his head. He pursed his lips and turned to the documents in front of him. Mirai went over one document after another, as the greenette's small snoring sound filled the room. He had just planned on asking the duo to take a look at some documents for this time, but they hadn't been that important anyway. Mirio moved to the side a bit, and Mirai raised his head up just in time to see the greenette's head fall on the blonde's lap. After working on his papers for another 10 minutes, he stopped to stretch for a bit. "Sir?" Mirio began, and he hummed. "Have you looked into Aruto-sensei's records yet?" Mirai stopped and lowered the document in his hands, looking at Mirio with one of his eyebrows raised. "No, I haven't. I think that you should." He frowned. "Has something happened?" Mirio took a deep breath. Deku was right about his quirk. Everyone in my class is head over heels for him. They keep talking about how mysterious, how sweet he is, and just how majestic his eyes are. Mirai sighed. "I don't see anything wrong about the dash." "His eyes are anything but majestic," Mirio spat out, and the green-haired pro-hero frowned. "From the whole third-year Hero Corps students, only Nijire-chan, Sun Eater and I wear quirk-canceling lenses, and what we see is anything but majestic. The man is too touchy, to the point where it can be considered an abuse to a person's boundaries. For those who don't wear any protective lenses, his eyes are the most majestic thing that they can ever see. They say that it looks like cotton candies, of fluffy clouds that make them feel gooey inside, of mixed sprinkles and sparkles that light up their days. For us, his eyes are like a never-ending void that essees a person's soul. When the man is confident, when he is happy, it is a crimson blood like red, which makes me feel stuck, makes us want to give up and become a pawn for his games. When he is mad, it turns into a sewage, makes me feel sick inside and makes me feel guilty for no reason at all." Mirai frowned, and his eyes traveled down to the sleeping boy, before rising up to the blonde once again. "He makes sweet talk, and feeds other people lies and breaks the trust that they have in them. I have seen my classmates go quiet, stop doing something that they loved throughout their whole lives in just a week." The pro-hero watched his successor direct his gaze to the ground, as his nose scrunched up, and he glared at the ground. When he first talked to Nijire-chan, she wasn't wearing her lenses. She had been going on and on about a person's quirk, and he just set his finger on her chin and made her look into his eyes. He told her that he loved her rambles, that he found her enthusiasm cute and charming, but that being too enthusiastic outside wasn't good, and others might just see her as a nuisance. She stopped talking to us and her classmates for 2 days. Thankfully, she recently got a new pair of lenses from her agency after losing the last ones, and she was able to get out of its effect after looking into his eyes, which were no longer like cotton candies, but rather like a void. Mirio sighed, and Mirai brought his hands together. "We have to do something, send him away," the blonde said as he combed his fingers through the greenette's hairs, and Mirai took in a deep breath. "I want all of this written on a paper, all right?" the pro-hero demanded, and the blonde brightened up a bit. "I will look into it, but we don't even have a full name." I had already been planning on looking into these stuff, but had been planning on doing that after we got extra protective lenses. Mirio nodded. "All right, I'm gonna go outside, and you can wake up Midoriya while I am gone." He would feel pathetic if he woke up and thought that I have been here all along. The blonde smiled brightly, and Mirai just clicked his tongue. "Tell him that I wasn't here when he fell asleep, and that I have been away for a couple of hours now." The third-year student nodded a bit too enthusiastically, and the pro-hero just groaned as he exited the office. He had let the boy sleep to get some quiet for a while, and was leaving because he didn't want to bother with the boy when he woke up, and that was it. That was it. "Excuse me?" Tashinori looked up from the document that he had been reading. "All Might?" the pink-haired man asked, and he frowned. "Yes, but dash. Kami-sama. I am a huge fan," the other man said before letting out a small squeal. "Would it be all right if we took a photo together? And could you sign one of my posters?" The X-1 hero sighed, giving up. "May I ask who you are at first?" "Oh, silly me." The man let out a laugh, his cotton candy eyes turning into small crescents. For a moment, he found himself being lost in them. I am a substitute teacher here. For present Mike. Sensei, have you met Arudo sensei already? Our sub-homeroom teacher, only till Aizawa sensei comes back. So this wasn't who young Midoriya had been talking about. That was a relief. Nice to meet you, sir. He trailed off, and the man let out a small laugh. Takagi-san. Somehow, Toshinori could breathe once again when he heard the man's name. There must have been 2 substitute teachers then. He smiled. Of course, he said, letting himself slip into his hero persona. What should I sign? The way that the man's eyes sparkled made his heart skip a beat. Takagi put his hands in his pockets, as if trying to find something. A couple seconds passed, and the young man in front of him pouted, his eyes glimmering with unshed tears. What's wrong? Toshinori asked, and the pink net turned towards him. Thanks to the pink soft clouds in the man's eyes, his tears seemed like teardrops. I always keep it with me. I don't know what got into me, I must have forgotten it at home. Well, he trailed off as he watched tears stream down the man's eyes. I could always sign it tomorrow. He whipped a tear from his eyes, and hugged his arms to his chest, looking so fragile, so hurt. My ex comes over every Tuesday, so I can't go back home today. I don't know what to do. Toshinori watched, flabbergasted as the substitute teacher started to cry even harder in front of him. Kami, he had never been that good at comforting crying citizens. The only experience that he had had was with young Midoriya, and that was it. He sighed, and went forward, pulling the man to his chest and letting him cry, just like how he had let Izuka do in the past, for so many times. The man started crying even harder, and hugged him back. I am so sorry, I don't know what got over me. It's all right, Toshinori added, and the man held on to him even tighter. I usually keep all of this to myself and don't talk about these kind of stuff, but he still refuses to return my keys to me, and comes every now and then, leaving death threats, trashing the place, and the man tried to cry once again, and Toshinori sighed. What kind of a person could even do such a thing? Takagi looked like such a sweetheart, such a nice person that he could depend. He stopped. Depend on? The man pulled back and looked him in the eyes, his gaze never leaving his. Go with him, help him out for just this once, something in his mind begged, and he sighed. I guess that I could accompany you if you wanted for me to, he said, and the way that the man beamed melted his heart. All right, should we go with my car then? The pinknet asked, and he nodded slowly. He was going to help him get his things and then help him go to a hotel. That was it, and what was the worst that could happen? The road didn't take long, and they were there in less than an hour. If Toshinori was to call the place where the man lived a wreck, he wouldn't be exaggerating. They climbed up the stairs one by one, the irritating sounds that came from the stairs following after them. The number 1 hero watched as the man stopped in front of a door which had already started to rot, and had to hold himself back from pinching his nose to avoid the smell. The door was so weak to the point that he just knew that it would break, if a kid punched it without using his quirks. The door opened, and he felt his heart ache at the sound that the pink net let out. Whole place was ruined, plates were broken and on the floor, pictures ripped apart and pinned to the wall with red paint, and what looked like his poster was on the ground with a questionable substance staining it. The blonde pro hero heard the man next to him let out a cry, as he reached for the poster, and had to pull him back by the arm. It's all ruined, the male cried out, and this time the hug came voluntarily. He rubbed the man's back and heard the man try to breathe. I had worked so hard to get this place, and it's all gone now. Toshinori just hushed him, as he felt tears gather in his eyes. The man pulled back, and looked him in the eyes, tears trailing down his cheeks. I'm so sorry that you had to see this like this. I had hoped that this place would have been in a decent state, had hoped that I would have been able to serve you some tea for taking the time to come here, but Toshinori hugged him once again, shushing him softly. It's all right, okay? He asked, doing his best to hold back his tears. It's not okay for my hero, my idol, to think badly of me. I had been hoping to meet you for so long, but never like this. Toshinori pulled back, and gave the other a small smile. Hey, he began to say as he whipped off a tear from the man's face. It's alright, okay? We can find you a hotel and dash. I don't have enough money yet, and I won't be able to pay for a hotel? Then how about we go back to school? I am sure that Nedzu dash. Principal Nedzu would have already went home. Toshinori sighed and looked away. It was dumb and he knew it, Kami-sama. He looked back at the man and pink relaxing clouds looked back at him. He sighed. There was no way that this person could tick anyone. He looked like the type that would cry over the death of a bug. I know that it would be really inappropriate, but you can stay at my place for a while, just till you set your life straight? The man shook his head repeatedly. I couldn't dare to ask something like that from you, he said, his eyes becoming filled with tears once again. Toshinori just sighed. The man in front of him was just too innocent for this world. Don't worry, I will give the room's keys to you, so that you can lock it from the inside, and I will also lock my room too? Are you sure? I mean, I have already asked too much of you. It will only be for a while, so you don't have to worry. Takagi beamed at that, and hugged him once again. Toshinori rubbed his back, as the shorter male set his chin on his shoulders. As the blonde hero pitted the pink net, Takagi Arudo grinned madly towards the empty space. Heroes, they were all so pathetic and naive. Inko rubbed her eyes as she got up to the sound of her phone. The All Might-themed clock stared back at her from its place on the wall, almost as if glaring at her, telling her that she was late once again. But late for what? She let out a tired sigh, having forgotten what she had gotten up for in the first place, and went to lay back once again, but stopped as soon as her phone started to ring once again. The green-haired woman gingerly lowered her feet from the top of the sofa, letting out a soft yawn as she stretched a bit. She had been sleeping on the couch the last couple of days, not having any energy to walk to her bed thanks to her messed-up sleep schedule. Slowly, she stood up and took a hold of her phone as she rubbed her eyes one more time. Who the hell would be sane enough to call someone past 11 p.m.? Don't people have better things to do than bother someone at this hour? Like sleeping? She groaned one final time, her eyes still not used to the light that her phone emitted, and swiped it open. Yes, she said with a sigh. The voice of her caller was enough for her eyes to open like saucers as she placed her empty hand to her chest, thanking Kami for his mercy. Mom? The caller called out once again, and Inko sighed deeply, before wiping away the tears that threatened to fall down her eyes. Izuku, she whispered, and the soft sigh that her baby boy let out was enough for her to feel guilty once again. The whole weekend had been a blur for her, and she was sure that she wouldn't remember it for a very long time, but the fact that her baby had called her, the fact that he reached out to her before she reached out to him had to count for something. It had to mean that she hadn't messed up, at least not as badly as she had done for so many times in the past. Mom, I'm so sorry for the weekend. It was my fault. I had been so stressed lately and I just snapped because it felt too much, and dash. She shushed him softly, before letting out a wet yet happy laugh. Izuku was her baby boy all right, there was absolutely no doubt in that. From his dash of green hair, porcelain skin and green eyes, to his constant muttering storms that seemed to hit at the most unexpected moments. From his blinding smile, to his eyes that formed crescents ever so frequently. A perfect mix of Hisashi and herself, leaving every bad thing behind and only taking things that could be considered angelic. He was everything that she could have wished for and more. She had been so lucky to have a son like Izuku, who was an angel that was bound to save anyone that came into his way. Her baby had never deserved to be the son of a monster like herself and Hisashi. She was a mess, incapable of... It wasn't your fault, baby, okay? She whispered, not wanting there to be any more silence between the two of them. Her baby had saved her again and again for so many times in the past. He had been there for her whenever she had needed him, even when she had failed to do so for him over and over again. So how could she have believed Arudo over him? Izuku was her baby boy, he was her. Teenagers tend to lie sometimes, especially those that are ignored most of the time. She clenched her hands as Arudo's voice echoed in her head. It wasn't your fault that you ignored him, it wasn't your fault that you didn't have time for him, he is quirkless. Anyone else would have thrown him out or left him as soon as they saw him, and yet you stayed. He should just shut up and do everything that you ask of him. That is the least that he can do for how much he has put you through. She took in a deep breath before letting out a shaky one, as she raised her empty shaking hand to her forehead to message her temples, hoping to chase away the whisper of a headache that would soon leave her miserable. Mom? Izuku's weary voice entered her ears for the nth time, and she forced herself to empty her head of all of those useless thoughts. Sorry, dear. I kinda had a tiring day, she said cheerfully, letting out a small laugh. She knew that Izuku had probably picked up on how fake her laugh had sounded. Unlike anyone else, she heard her baby also let out a laugh, a wet and fake one. With that, Inko felt actual tears stream down her face. How about we talk later this week? She asked. I can maybe cook us some katsudon, and we can watch TV and have a relaxing weekend for this once. I gotta watch over Eri-chan this weekend, Mom, but maybe we can do it the week after that. She sighed, and brought her hand down from her forehead, this time giving her arm a little squeeze. Izuku wasn't only hers any longer, and the way that her little hero went around saving others from their demons just warmed up her heart. Alright, it's a date then, she said, and heard her boy let out a small chuckle. Till later, the younger Greenette asked from the other side of the phone, and Inko nodded, even though she knew that Izuku couldn't see her. Yeah, talk to you later, love, she murmured fondly and heard Izuku let out a small yawn. Bye, Mom, he replied back tiredly, and Inko smiled as she imagined her baby boy letting out another small yawn, resembling a small kitten. With that, the line went dead. She lowered her phone from her ear and placed it on the counter, her hands brushing against the liquor bottle that stood next to it. Inko sighed miserably. Her baby didn't deserve everything that she had put him through. He didn't deserve a drunk mom that hurt him every now and then before turning a new leaf the next day. Years ago, Inko had thought that she could stop drinking by herself, that the idea of Izuku would have been enough for her to throw away all of her liquor, but now, as the demons that sat at the back of her head whispered that one sip wouldn't be too much, she knew that she needed help and that she needed it soon. She just needed to hold on for 2 more years, knowing that she could sign up for the much-needed help after her baby was able to stand on his own 2 feet. Eri's head bolted up, her curly pixie-cut hair bobbing up and down as she did so. She smiled at the masterpiece that stood in front of her, and held it up to the ceiling, her smile becoming even wider as she admired it once again. A small knock was heard from the outside door, which made her put it down and bent her head to the side. Who is it? She called out before fear could settle in. She had had too many restless nights, where she had seen her monsters knock the door down, before taking her away from her little safe haven. Daddy and Mike had been with her whenever she had had those kind of dreams, but now the duo were gone and a small rhythm was heard from the outside door, cutting through her worries with a sharp knife. The white-haired girl let a smile take over her features, as her frown fully disappeared and she jumped down her chair. She turned towards the door, before biting her lips and running towards her room instead, the corners of her lips almost reaching the skies as she dashed through the small house. She carefully put her masterpiece upside down in her bookshelf and ran back towards the living room. The white-net ran to the door with small steps and unlocked it just the way that Zashi-chan had thought her to do. Her smile grew even bigger as she ran into one of her hero's open arms, a little giggle escaping her lips as the green-net pulled him even more into his chest. Zuku, you are squeezing me, she let out, and the green-net finally let go of her. She got up and did a little twirl, making the older gasp. You cut your hair, he exclaimed, pointing out the obvious, and she let out another giggle. Yep. Daddy gave up on becoming a hairstylist way too long ago, and decided to cut it just before he went away. She welcomed his hand, which fell on the top of her head, and smiled even bigger at his shocked expression. Now, her hair was styled just like Zuku's, curly, short and messy all the time, no matter how much others tried to tame it. Her eyes formed little crescents, as the greenette's shocked expression turned into a fond one. Eri took a hold of his hand, pulling him inside before going to lock the door. She pulled him till they reached the couch, and sat him down before running back to her bedroom with fast steps. She picked up the drawing that she had put away earlier, and hid it behind her as she ran back inside. Close your eyes, she called out, and heard the older boy let out a giggle before saying okay. She put away all the stuff on the table before closing the TV. standing in front of the greenette, with her drawing hiding behind her without any distractions. She smiled once again. She held it in front of her, her creation now facing Zuko as she giggled. "You can open them now," Eri called out, and watched as Deku opened his eyes, letting out a silent wow as he took in the mash of colors. The white-haired girl jumped onto the place next to him on the couch, and smiled as she pointed towards the figure on the left. "That is Daddy," she exclaimed, and the older one just hummed fondly. "Next to him is Mike, then Toshi and Mir-chan. And that little bundle of sunshine is you, right?" "Yep. And next to me is you." The greenette was silent, so Eri just looked up at him, his tearful eyes making her smile even more. "Eri, this is amazing," the boy exclaimed, and Eri just kept on smiling as the boy analyzed her whole drawing, pointing out every single way that the drawing was a masterpiece. Her masterpiece. Izuku watched as the girl ran around the house, looking for her new toy that she wanted to show him. It had been 2 very long weeks, but now that it was ending, he felt like he could breathe once more. Here he was, next to Eri, who Arudo couldn't reach. Arudo. The whole 2 weeks had felt like a puppet show, with the pink-haired devil in control of the strings and the script. His classmates had fawned over their sup teacher nonstop, talking about him every break that they got. It had disgusted him to an extent, the way that their eyes shined whenever someone even used the word pink, how they had marveled over the man's beauty nonstop. And Izuku had tried his best, trying to avoid eye contact with Arudo however he could, but he knew that soon he would become a puppet too. "I found it." He turned towards Eri, who was holding a plush unicorn in her 2 hands, and managed to fake a smile, trying to ignore the lenses which he had stuffed in his pocket, no matter how much they seemed to weigh him down. "It's very pretty," Izuku said as he picked her up and sat her on his lap. "I don't really know what its name is, since Mike said that it was from pre-Quirk era and that they weren't really produced any longer dash." "It's an unicorn," Izuku cut her off, making her turn towards him, her eyes big with wonder and excitement. It was a myth for most of the people pre-Quirk era, and people believed that they were magical. Izuku turned it to the side, and pointed towards the place where it had wings. It could carry those with a pure heart above the clouds, and take them to their own land. "Wow," Eri said, her eyes glinting, and Izuku let out a fond sigh once again. He put one of his hands in his pocket, where the lenses stood, and sighed. "Could I ask you for a favor, Eri?" he asked, and the girl's head whipped towards him, her eyes glimmering in wonder. She nodded her head fastly, and he watched as her hair jumped up and down. Izuku took out the lenses and handed it over to the girl, who took it. "What are these?" she asked, and the greenette patted her snow-white hair. "These are lenses." He opened the box and turned them towards the girl, which were made to protect people from quirks which worked with eye contact. "Like Daddy?" she asked, and he shook his head. "There is a villain at our school now, and they will be here till Sensei is back. He can control others with eye contact." He stopped as he imagined Eri, sitting on Arudo's lap as he threaded his fingers through her hair, telling her to do things for his benefit, using her like a puppet. "And he is here because no one knows of what he can do, no one knows just how evil he can be, just how cruel and disgusting. He can put you under his control even more and more as time passes by, and you wouldn't even know that he has been controlling you till it is already too late. You have to promise to wear them all the time." His thoughts went faster and faster as he continued his muttering. Eri had already went through so much, even though she was so young. She had been called cruel things just because of her quirk, had been used for her quirk, had suffered for so long because of it. Izuku couldn't bear the though of the little girl going through another hell, as if the first one hadn't been enough. "As long as you are not sleeping, you also can't tell anyone about this dash." His muttering storm had been stopped by the small hands that had went around his neck, before embracing him. He looked down at the bundle of sunshine in his arms, and after a few seconds buried his face in her hair, being engulfed by the smell of apples. He wasn't sure just when he had started crying, just when everything had gotten this messed up, that he needed to bring Eri into his problems like this. Arudo was supposed to be his problem, and his problem only. Not his classmates, not his senpais, not his mother's, and certainly not Eri's. He just continued to put the lives of others into danger non-stop. "I'll wear them," Eri murmured softly, and Izuku hugged her even tighter. It didn't matter if Arudo made him into a puppet, it didn't matter if he did anything to him, as long as he was able to protect Eri, as long as the girl didn't become one of his puppets just like he had become in the past. Izuku stretched once more as he sighed deeply. "Izanaiken?" Eri asked, and he turned towards her with a small smile, not wanting to worry her even more than he already had, after the events of yesterday. "Yes, Eri-chan," he said, and lowered down to her height, to be able to look her in the eyes. She went forward, her arms going around his neck, before white locks covered his vision. "Stay safe," she murmured, and he sighed, before returning the hug. They stayed that way for a while, before Izuku finally had the courage to mutter out a soft, "I will." It was the only confirmation that Eri needed to finally back away from him, letting him get up. He checked his watch and felt himself relax when he saw what time it was. "Call me when Tagata-senpai gets here, alright?" he asked, and she nodded brightly. He knelt down and gave her another quick hug, before getting out with his backpack hanging off his back. "Bye-bye," the white-haired girl called out to him, before shutting the door after Izuku. He clutched the straps of his backpack harder with that, already regretting the promise that he had made Eri. Denki let out a deep sigh, as he wandered into the dorm kitchen, taking out the bento boxes that Katsuki had made for him for the weekend, along the lines of, "We don't need an idiot like you burning down the kitchen for us." He took a deep breath and opened the fridge, frowning when he saw a total of 12 boxes. 6 of them were an electric yellow, while the other 6 were a dark shade of green, a green which reminded him of... He jumped as he heard the dorm door open, and stuck his head out, his mouth opening and forming a little "oh" as he was met with the sight of his friend. Denki opened his mouth to call out to him, but stopped, frowning when he took in the greenette's tired and troubled gaze. Not wanting to scare him, he turned back to his task at hand, not wanting to let the boy know that he had seen through the mask that he wore all the time. He went back to the kitchen. He looked around before opening one of the cupboards and taking out a pan. "Here goes nothing," the electric blonde whispered to himself, and shut his eyes close, as he dropped it to the ground, the sound that came from the contact being enough to scare him as he fell down the chair. Denki heard a soft gasp, before the sound of Izuku's quirk entered his ears, making him smile behind his hand, making it seem as if he was covering his mouth in shock. "Kaminari-kun?" Izuku asked, and Denki turned towards him with a sheepish grin on his face. "Izuku, my man." The greenette leaned down to help him up, and he accepted it, the smile never leaving his face. "What were you doing here, Kaminari-kun?" the shorter boy asked, and he just rubbed the back of his head. "Well, since I thought that there wasn't going to be anyone here for the weekend, I thought that I could finally try my hand in the kitchen." That made the greenette smile, and he felt accomplished for the first time in a while. "Well then, Kaminari-kun, how about we make something together?" the angel asked as he smiled, and Denki found himself saving this moment in his memory. Izuku was a cinnamon roll. God, Denki really wanted a cinnamon roll right now. "Sure," the electric blonde said, as he let himself be pulled up by the green-haired boy. Izuku pulled him towards the fridge, already mumbling away about all the things that they could make, while Denki's mind was focused on Izuku's hands that were still holding on to his hands. He blamed the heat that he felt on his cheeks and ears on the air, as the other male opened the fridge, stopping at the sight of the bento boxes. "What? Oh, Bakugo made them." Izuku frowned at that, and Denki wondered if he had said something wrong. "I forgot to apologize to him." Denki knew that Izuku hadn't muttered those words for him to hear, but he did, and somehow they broke his heart. He gave a squeeze at Izuku's hand, and the shorter one flinched, before turning towards him with wandering eyes. "I didn't know that you were going to be staying for the weekend, but I guess he did. The dark green ones were for you." Izuku let go of his hand, before taking out the bento box that was at the top, which matched his hair color, before turning it towards himself, as if to check if Denki was telling the truth. Denki looked at Izuku, and knew from the soft sad smile on the greenette's face that Katsuki had known that Izuku would be staying over, and that the 6 boxes filled with katsudon were carefully though, just like his 6 boxes of hamburgers had been, and knew that this was the angry Pomeranian's way of apologizing to the greenette. The both of them laid down on the ground after having watched a horror movie together. It was late, and getting later with every passing second, and yet both of them couldn't sleep at all. If someone had asked Izuku how he thought the last 2 days would have went, he would have guessed both of them in their rooms, not conversing at all till their classmates started to come. Hell, Izuku had thought that anyone from class would have avoided him after his outburst, but Kaminari hadn't left him alone at all. After having discovered the lunchboxes, they had decided on baking something sweet together and had ended with 3 trays filled with cinnamon rolls. He had planned on leaving to his room after they finished cleaning up the kitchen, but Cam and Denki had different plans for the two of them. They had somehow ended up studying for their upcoming tests the next 2 weeks, which had led to them eating one of their bento boxes together, and that had led to them somehow watching a horror movie together. Now the two of them laid on 2 pieces of blankets on the roof, away from the chaos that was going on in the world, away from all of their worries, away from anyone that might intervene in their small world that had been created in the span of just a couple of hours. It amazed him how Kaminari had become Denki in just a couple of hours, and how he now knew so much about the other, and how the other knew so much about him. That's harsh, Denki commented as Izuku told him about how hard it had been to get into UA without a quirk, and all of the procedures that he had had to go through. Yeah, he murmured, and watched the other roll around so that he was looking at him. His eyes never stayed focused on one thing for too long, and that somehow made him feel more relaxed, to know that the electric blonde wasn't focusing on him, that his slip-ups could be ignored if they weren't too great. So you were pretty much registered as quirkless till you were 15? Yeah, pretty much. What dash? He watched as Denki rolled on his back once again, and reached up to the sky, as if he was trying to touch the stars that littered the night sky. What did your parents say then? When you told them that you wanted to be a hero? Without a quirk? He sighed as he also rolled onto his back. My dad left as soon as I was diagnosed as quirkless, while my mom cried and said that she was sorry that my dreams could never become reality, that I could never be a hero. He sighed, and placed his arm on his forehead, blocking Denki's view of his eyes, scared that he might see his tears, even though they were surrounded by the pitch-black sky like a blanket. But you are becoming a hero, your mother must be proud. Izuku let out a chuckle. If only it was that easy, if only things were that simple. It's hard to get rid of certain habits sometimes. And that was all the answer that Denki had needed as he sighed. My dash, Denki stopped, and Izuku didn't rush him, listening to him, waiting for him to continue patiently. With the patience that Denki had gifted him when he had been the one talking. My parents, or well, my father to be more specific, didn't like the idea of me becoming a hero all that much. The electric blonde stopped once again, as the sound of the wind filled the silence between them. He was delighted when I got my quirk, and had plans for my future, plans that were designed without my thoughts being put into account, without them asking what I would like. They never asked what I wanted. Izuku hummed. He didn't remember that much about his father, but he did remember plans that were too big for him, and how disappointed he had been when all of them had simply ceased to exist. So it was to be accepted, I guess, for them to be disappointed with me when I said that I wanted to be a hero, among other things. Among other things? Denki sighed. I have ADHD and among other things. Izuku hummed. Among other things. He didn't know why, but he guessed that he could somehow relate to that statement. Izuku looked at the stars and imagined them looking down at the two of them, found himself wishing for better days, even though there weren't any shooting stars in sight. I was quite happy, to be honest, when we were asked to come and live at the dorms. It does get lonely sometimes, to be honest, but not as lonely as it gets home, with people who want nothing to do with me. Izuku somehow found himself being able to relate, able to understand, because he knew just how lonely it could be to be trapped with those that didn't even want to acknowledge his presence in the slightest. I'm also glad that you stayed over this weekend. Silence took over them after that, and the two of them watched the stars and the moon till they disappeared and made place for the morning sun, rising and somehow lighting up both of their day. Me too. The sun didn't light up their days because it was the sun, but because the rare lonely sight that they had become familiar with over time was not so lonely for one night. Because this time, two lost kids had somehow managed to find a home within each other, a home that they were supposed to find in the house that they were born to, a home that they had deserved all of their lives given to them at last for the first time in their short 16-year lives. Denki was eating cinnamon rolls when Izuku woke up and went downstairs to the common room. He was still in his Pikachu shorts from the days before, along with a t-shirt which had a lightning bolt on top of it. One of his legs was pulled to his chest as his arm was holding onto it, while the other was simply underneath it. Denki took another bite out of his cinnamon roll and went to the next one. He took a look at the kitchen and held back a laugh at how much it had been destroyed. I thought that I could bake a cake at 9,000 degrees in 1 minute. Denki said simply, as he bit into his cinnamon roll. His cheeks became filled with the desert and reminded Izuku of a chipmunk. Since it said that it would cook in 50 minutes for 180 degrees. Izuku hummed, as a grin took over his features. That would be a good experiment to try with Shudo, he murmured, and watched as a similar expression took over Denki's features. I know, right? Izuku nodded. But an oven would not be strong enough to withhold that much heat. Did you took it out from the charger and overcharged it with your mouth? I actually did it with my hand only. Izuku hummed, his hand itching for his notebook. Denki must have realized that, even through his hyper mind, because his grin became wider as he pointed towards his back where the stairs to their dorm rooms were. I'll answer any question I can. Izuku didn't need to be told twice, as he bolted up the stairs with one for all running through his veins, and went to his bedroom, which wasn't locked. He went through all of his notebooks that had been randomly put in a pile since he hadn't really been able to organize them the last 2 weeks, and threw the useless ones on his bed. The greenette jolted when he heard a knock come from his bedroom door, and turned to look at the electric blonde who stood there with all of his glory. Mind if I come in? Izuku stood up abruptly, and went to his bed, before pushing all of his notebooks to the side, creating a small space for the other to sit down on. Denki chuckled, but did as Izuku wanted. The greenette went back to his pile of notebooks as Denki went through the ones that he had thrown on his bed, reading the titles. I Can't Stop Twinkling, The Shining Hero. Pinky. Rainy Season Hero, Froppy Dash. The blonde stopped, and Izuku turned to look at him. You named your journals by our chosen hero names, Denki murmured, and Izuku tilted his head to the side, not understanding what Denki was trying to say. I thank you. Izuku smiled. Well, we are all going to be heroes someday. Yeah, we are. Denki let out a wet chuckle, as Izuku went back to sorting his notebooks. God, there were more than 100 of them now. Martial arts hero, Tailman. Uravity. Explosive H.O. Man number 4? You have 4 notebooks for Kaken? Izuku chuckled. Yeah, actually we had started together by looking at heroes on TV and writing about their good sides together. Kaken had done the writing, while I had done most of the analyzing and drawing. I don't even know where the first 2 of his notebooks are anymore. Denki let out a small wow as he opened the notebook, before he frowned. Wait, Izuku dash. The greenette turned towards him with a frown on his face. I can't read this. I know for a fact that your handwriting is not bad. Denki turned a couple of pages, before letting out a shocked gasp. Did you write these in a code? Did you create a special code for this? Yet I mean, he trailed off as Denki looked at him with big eyes. They might not be too much, but if they ever got in the hands of a bad person, if they ever got in Arudo's hands, it could still put you guys in a rough spot, you know? Kami Izuku? Yeah? He watched as Denki's amazed look was replaced with a soft expression. You are truly a gift, you know that, right? That was all it took for him to explode, as he turned into a tomato and tried to cover his face with his arm, looking anywhere but the blonde that was sitting on his bed. Denki kept on going through the notebooks, and becoming even more and more amazed as time went by. He didn't need to know the code to realize just how detailed Izuku's notes were on them, and it somehow made him relax to know that Izuku was keeping this knowledge to himself and that he wasn't using them against them at all. He put aside Momo's notebook after having gone through the countless drawings inside of it and frowned when he realized that there weren't any notebooks left. He stood up and looked around, stopping when he saw the one which had fallen on the ground. He brought his knees to his chest and opened Notebook XXX, frowning when he realized that this one wasn't written with a certain code like the others had been. Aruto Takeji. Denki stopped as his eyes grew big, realizing whose notebook it was. He thought that it was logical because after all Izuku took notes on everyone, but why was this in normal Japanese unlike all of the others? Didn't Izuku think that this could put Arudo-sensei in danger if it got in the wrong hands? He closed it before turning the notebook around, frowning. Wait, what was Arudo-sensei's quirk again? He bit his lip. It was a pretty big notebook, much bigger than any of their notebooks had been, and it was strange how it was only about one person. He took in a deep breath and opened it once again. Aruto Takeji. Quirk. Name unknown. Quirk function. Makes the owner of the quirk force others to trust him through eye contact. It becomes stronger every time that eye contact is made and doesn't fade away with time. The quirk doesn't have any known side effects, and the time needed for the effect to fade away is also unknown. The quirk's effect doesn't fade, it just doesn't. Why doesn't it fade? It isn't logical at all. It is supposed to fade away. How? Theta kappa phi omicron noodle there's not exist minus or plus sigma nary coproduct increment command key left arrow curving right del. Left arrow curving right theta kappa phi omicron noodle there's not exist minus or plus sigma nary coproduct increment command key left arrow curving right del there's not exist minus or plus sigma nary coproduct increment command key left arrow curving right theta kappa phi omicron noodle there's not exist minus or plus sigma nary coproduct increment command key left arrow curving right. Theta kappa phi omicron noodle there does not exist minus or plus sigma nary coproduct increment command key left arrow curving right del there does not exist minus or plus sigma nary coproduct increment command key del there does not exist minus or plus sigma nary coproduct increment command key left arrow curving right theta kappa phi omicron noodle there does not exist minus or plus sigma dkf. Del there does not exist minus or plus sigma nary coproduct increment command key left arrow curving right theta kappa phi omicron noodle there does not exist minus or plus sigma nary coproduct increment command key left arrow curving right theta kappa phi omicron nu theta kappa phi omicron nu theta kappa phi omicron nu. Del there does not exist minus or plus sigma nary coproduct increment command key left arrow curving right del there does not exist minus or plus sigma nary coproduct increment command key. The rest of the sentence, the rest of the page had been crossed over so many times that he couldn't read it, so he turned the page. A victim that I know who had talked to Arudo at most 5 times had a breakdown after talking to him a couple of days ago, which was 3 years after they had talked for the first time. It is believed that Arudo makes those that are under the effect of his quirk by turning their words against them. It scares me just what he might be able to do with his quirk. He felt goosebumps over his whole body as he realized that Izuku had started to write from his mouth directly after that, unlike how it had been in his notebook which Izuku had translated a bit for him. It scared him to imagine Izuku losing his cool about something like this. The quirk gives the owner a glass-like eye color, which makes people wonder about it and look at the man, again and again, to see what his eye color actually is. Did Denki know what Arudo's eye color had been? Had he ever really looked him in the eye before? It gives him an advantage as he doesn't need to force people to look into his eyes. Well, most of the time. I remember him forcing me to look into his eyes after class one day, 3 years ago. I still can't remember which color they had been, can't remember what he had said while I had looked into his eyes, had gotten lost in them, but I do know that I had felt something sickly sweet inside of my head, blocking something, and pushing something else into my head. I wonder if that was when I had started to have suicidal thought. Denki stopped, his heart hammering inside of his chest as he turned the page, knowing that he couldn't read the rest of whatever Izuku was going to say. The man's eye color, as told by Kaken, is actually a misty gray on the background and a mix of different colors in the middle. Most say that it reminds them either of clouds or cotton candy, giving them comfort whenever they look him in the eye. His weakness is still unknown. The target is too touchy-feely. He joins heroics lessons even though he knows nothing about fighting. He is smart, not to be taken lightly. Denki trailed over the drawing with the tip of his fingers, letting out a shuddering breath as he realized that this was exactly as he had seen the man's eyes, but not at the same time. Hi's fingers shook as he turned the page once again. He was already on page 26. I talked with Mirio-senpai, Amajiki-senpai and Hato-senpai and they told me how Arudo's eyes had looked like to them. It turns out that one of the reasons that one can't really remember how his eyes looks like is because it changes with his mood most of the time. Hato-senpai had been under his control for almost 3 days, and said that whenever he was confident it would feel as if she was in a field of sunflowers, whenever he was angry it would be like a rainy day in a river, And whenever he was happy it would be a red shade that would make someone think of roses, which would make someone get so lost in his eyes that they could even smell the roses. She said that the red shade was the most dangerous, that it would make her want to submit everything that she had and would ever have in her entire life to Arudo, not caring what it would mean for her at the end of the road. For any other emotions it would become a shade of pink that reminds people of soft pink clouds that come with the setting sun, or of cotton candies that mostly bring fond memories. I think that this is the one that most people see, and the one most people are tricked to trust. Denki turned the page to be met with 4 different drawings, one for each of Arudo's moods. He turned the page once again, feeling dizzy just by trying to imagine Arudo-sensei with any of these eyes. For Mirio-senpai and Amage-senpai it was completely different than how it was for Hato-senpai. The lenses really make a difference. According to Mirio-senpai, whenever Arudo was confident in himself his eyes would remind him of a dark void that esikidi in any kind of light. But for Amajiki-senpai it was also different as he saw snakes that made him feel as if he was getting suffocated. I think that whenever he is confident, Arudo's eyes remind those with lenses of things that would make them feel as if they were losing their confidence. When he is mad, both Mirio-senpai and Amajiki-senpai say that it reminds them of a sewage, brown and filthy, and if they look long enough they can actually smell the foul smell off of Arudo. When he is happy, both of them said that they can literally see corpses in his eyes. Corpses that were so brutally murdered that Amajiki-senpai had cried after seeing them. It's as if the quirk is trying to make those with protectors look away, to protect themselves from Arudo, which I find weird somehow. He turned the page once again, and was met with 7 different drawings this time. The last one, which was supposed to be how Arudo's eyes looked when he was happy, had been scribbled over and crossed out again and again. Denki shuddered as he turned the page once again. It makes me wonder if that is how he sees himself in the mirror, and I also wonder how it would affect someone if they stared into their eyes for so long. I wonder how I would feel if I were to ever meet his eyes again. My mother had confirmed to me that the effect of the quirk didn't leave even after 3 years had passed, even though they hadn't really properly talked at all. So why am I not affected by how his quirk works? Is it because of the fact that I know of his quirk? Denki? He jumped and closed the notebook shut, his heart going crazy as if it was trying to escape his ribcage while his hands were shaking nonstop. He took in a deep breath as he thought of Arudo-sensei. Everyone else, even Dash. Izuku's hand fell on his, which had been clutching onto the notebook. "Hey," the greenette said softly, but Denki just stared at him with terrified eyes. "You how?" "I tried telling someone 3 years ago, Dash. My mother had confirmed to me that the effect of the quirk didn't leave even after 3 years had passed, even though they hadn't really properly talked at all." Denki went forward, the notebook falling from his grip as he held on to the greenette. I wonder if that was when I had started to have suicidal thought. He let out a hiccup as he thought of the greenette committing suicide, thought of this little bundle of sunshine that wanted the best for everyone having cruel thoughts about himself. I believe you," he let out a hiccup. "I believe you, Izuku." He clutched onto Izuku even tighter. "I will always believe you, even if no one else does." For the first time in his whole life, Denki found himself being glad that he couldn't really keep eye contact that long. And for the first time in so long, Izuku let himself cry his heart out as he held on to Denki, trying to calm the electric blonde. Inko frowned as she heard the phone ring, and put the ladle on the table. She opened it with a soft smile on her face, a part of her hoping that it was Izuku. "Hello, Inko dear." She smiled as Arudo's voice entered her ears. "Hello, Arudo-san. I hope that you have been doing well." "I certainly have, and judging by your voice I think that you have been having a very good time too, haven't you, my love?" She sighed fondly, the man's voice sounding dreamy, as if it was putting her under a spell to forget all of her worries like his eyes were. "I certainly have been having a good time, yes." She frowned. "I hope that Izuku hasn't been causing trouble in class once again." "No, of course not, dear. I was wondering if I could drop by sometime today to see Izuku, if that would be all right with you, Dash." "Oh, sorry, but he isn't here right now. He looked after the daughter of..." She trailed off, something inside of her whispering that it was a bad idea to say it was Aizawa-san's daughter. Inko didn't know why, but she just felt like it was a bad idea to tell him who Izuku had really been with that weekend. I think it was the daughter of one of his classmates' older siblings. He does like running to help anyone in need. I see, Arudo trailed off. But you can tell me if you want, or tell him at school, she suggested, and heard the man let out a soft hum. I was planning on creating some kind of 6-week program for a couple of my students to help them improve as much as they could before I needed to leave, and thought it would benefit Izuku. I knew him and Bakugu from 3 years ago, so I guessed that it would be a good idea to ask you and then Bakugu's parents dash. What kind of program are we talking about? Well, Arudo trailed off, and Inko bit her lips. I have actually realized that some of the students tend to get really hurt and worried about them, so I was planning on creating a program that would help them with everything. From managing their hero and school life, the conditions of their bodies, a couple of classes on first aid kit, ways to their mindsets, and so much more. It would only be on the weekends, and would be till after the break. So it would mean 2 weekends plus 2 weeks plus 2 weekends? She frowned. I don't think that it would be that smart to make the kids focus on their school lives fully for so long. They are still kids and dash. God, Inko. I knew that you could be selfish sometimes, but not this much. She flinched. You are the one that is actually trying to monopolize him, aren't you? You are the one that is trying to keep him to yourself and trying to make him fail. No, I would never want that for my baby dash. Open your eyes, love. Your baby is risking his life every day by going to Yui. If you can't do this small thing for him, what kind of a mother are you? Tears threatened to spill down her eyes as she let out a choke. Arudo, you know how much I care about him, right? I would never do anything that would make him sad, or that would put him in harm's way. I know that your mind has been a mess for the last couple of days. Love, I can't even imagine how hard it must be as a single mom to look after a troublesome kid like Izuku. So let me help you, yeah? She let out a deep breath as she shuddered. Inko leaned on the small desk as tears started to fall down his eyes. Arudo, I love Izuku so much, but I don't deserve him. I don't deserve him at all. Oh, love. He is the one that doesn't deserve a wonderful mom like you. He is a selfish bastard that doesn't know his place. I'll teach him well these couple of weeks, yeah? The man murmured, and Inko let out a sob. Okay, but please don't be too harsh on him, okay? Can you do that as a friend? Of course, love. I'll even give the rewards if they are successful in completing the assignments and homework I give them. Okay, she murmured. I'm coming over, okay, love? We'll go drinking and can talk about everything together, yeah? Okay, she repeated, feeling as if she was drained. Maybe a drink wouldn't be that bad. After all, she waited as the line went dead, and her knees buckled underneath her. Cammy, what had she been his mother? Why had she been given a quirkless son like him? Why did she deserve a selfish bastard like him as her son? She was trying hard, she was trying so hard. God, why had she married that bastard? Why hadn't she left with him? Kamizuku was her baby, he was her baby boy. She had looked after him, she had raised him. God, she was her baby, how could she even think about leaving him? Maybe Arudo really was right. Maybe she just wasn't cut out for this.